Hey everyone, my name is Neel, and in this video today we're going to talk about networking with the big three consulting firms, so McKinsey, Bain, and BCG. But before that, quick introduction for those of y'all who are new. My name is Neel, and I work at Bain as a consultant, and the other person who usually makes videos with me, Rohit, he's an intern at Bain right now. We both came from a non-target school when trying to apply to the big three, and so we found it really frustrating that we couldn't figure out all of the things that we needed to know in one or even several places. It was a pretty tough process for us. And so now we want to make a YouTube channel that provides you all the information that you need to know. We hope that our videos are more informative, more concise, and hopefully more entertaining than other consulting videos out there. But in this video, I'll be covering a topic that I've been getting hundreds of comments and emails about, which is how to network. Considering the state of our world in 2020, where in-person recruiting sessions and in-person things aren't really going to be happening, I'll be focusing on the more digital ways that you can do that. So, email, LinkedIn, phone calls, Zooms, that kind of stuff. However, always keep in mind, if y'all want us to make more videos about specific topics, for example, about how to network with people in person or through recruiting sessions where it's a face-to-face kind of thing, let us know down below and we can definitely do that. And then also the other thing I would like to all to keep in mind is that what I'll talk about in this video is not just pertinent for when you're trying to reach out to, talk to, network with people who work at the big three firms, but really with anyone that you can use even later on in life. And I'll give you an example of how I'm using networking and trying to reach out to people for this other thing that I'm trying to do. But now let's cover what I'll actually be covering in the video. So I'm going to break this video up into three parts. In the first one, we're going to talk about what is networking, how do most people think of it, and then what are maybe some better ways that you can think of it so it can become a more natural process for you, something that's a little less awkward and a little less cringy, and something that becomes more effective. And then also talking about why networking is important. In the second part, I'll talk about how you actually go about doing it, and the way that I think I like looking at it and the way that I'll break it down is by doing the before. What are the things that you need to do before you even figure out who you need to reach out to? And then what are the kinds of messages you want to say so that you can have the highest likelihood that someone will accept a meeting with you? Then the during, how do you want to approach the call while you're actually talking to someone? And then the third thing, what are some quick things that you can do afterward to continue to build a relationship? And then the third part of the video, the last part, I think this will be pretty cool. I will go over some examples of emails or LinkedIn requests that I've gotten, some that are good examples of what we will be talking about, and some that are not so good, and then talking to you about why the good examples are good and the bad examples aren't that great and how they could be improved. I think that'll be pretty cool for y'all to see, and a little bonus for those of y'all who stick through the entire thing. So let's get into it. First things first, let's talk about what even is networking. So I think when people think about the word networking, they almost cringe automatically and think of it as something that they don't really want to do because it's icky and it's selfish. And I think using that definition that most people have of networking being just going to these events and talking to people you're not interested in just so that you could get a foot in the door, like that is definitely not fun, and I don't think anyone likes that. But that's not how I look at networking. The way I look at networking is as follows. All of us have things that we want to do in our lives, right? Whether it's, I'm sure for most of y'all it's getting a big three consulting job, but there's other things as well, like getting a scholarship, going to grad school, going to undergraduate school. And so when you're thinking about those things, you're trying to figure out, okay, are these experiences or this job or whatever it might be the right thing for me? But you can't figure that out until you actually go do it, right? But the best alternative is talking to people who have done those experiences so that you can learn from them and hopefully figure out and make a better decision. Networking, in my view, is doing this. It's talking to people who have experiences of things that you want to do just so that you can get their opinion, you can hear about how it was from their perspective, and then potentially even get their advice how to better increase your chances of getting whatever job or scholarship you're trying to get. Additionally, they've done something that you're interested in doing, and so maybe they might have some common traits or common interests with you that could end up sparking a friendship or a better relationship down the road. I think framing networking like that makes it a little more approachable. And I think the other thing to keep in mind as well that helps me a lot is that knowing that when you are on the other side and people are reaching out to you, that you will be more than happy to help them out as it makes sense. Me keeping that in mind and then being on the other side and doing it has really reinforced with me that networking and reaching out to people you don't know is okay, because people are always happy to help others out, especially with things that they struggled with or went through themselves. Now that we've covered what networking is and potentially, hopefully a better way for you to think about it, now let's talk about why it's important. And I've kind of already talked about the general reasons as to why it could be important, but specifically with consulting, I think there are two reasons that you'd want to network or talk to people within these consulting firms. The first one, which is kind of a reiteration of another point I've already made, is that it allows you to pressure test a job the industry, and the people. If you're talking to a lot of these people from a certain firm or another firm and you really don't like them, then that's a pretty good indication that maybe you wouldn't fit there, or that you might not want to apply there and you might want to focus your energies on another firm. Or you might hear that the things that they're doing on the job are things that you're like, I don't want to be doing that stuff, you know? And if that's the case, then you just saved yourself a lot of time and potentially pain in either forcing yourself through an interview process that you wouldn't want to be going through, or worst case, getting a job that you realize like you don't like. So networking and talking to people within consulting can really help you figure out these kinds of questions of really understanding if this is the job that you want to do. And then the second thing of how networking can help you is that I believe it can help you get an interview. Of course, the formula to get an interview at McKinsey, Bain, BCG, or really any other company is not necessarily a set formula. It's going to vary based on a lot of different things like your resume, the school you come from, and then also how the interactions that you have with these people goes. But one thing that networking, especially if you do it in the right way, can help you with is making sure that the right people know about your name and your interest when they're figuring out who should get an interview. But to do that involves actually talking to the people in the firm and then making sure that you're approaching it in the right way given your situation. Let me quickly explain what knowing your situation means. For example, if you are coming from a target school, like use the examples of some universities in the US, like a Stanford or Harvard or a UT Austin or something, then you don't need to do the random networking of just finding people on LinkedIn and reaching out to them. What you need to be doing is going to these info sessions and meeting and building relationships with the consultants who are usually going to be alumni from your school when they're coming to campus. However, if you're from a non-target school, kind of like how Rohit and I were, then you need to figure out a couple things. The first thing you need to figure out is, are they going to come to campus or not? The answer is probably no, but then you can also figure out, are there alumni who are relatively young and working at these firms right now? Because those are the people that would probably know the best way for you to go about getting an interview, and maybe even the people who might have some sort of decision-making power over it. And so rather than randomly reaching out to a bunch of people, you should be reaching out to the alumni from your school who are now in these firms, or potentially who have worked at these firms before. And then if you're from a non-target school and you're really out of luck and there's no one from your school you could find who has worked at or currently works at any of these firms you're applying to, then that's probably when you need to do more of the random reaching out, just so that you can get your name and your foot in the door, and so that you can also just start having conversations with people in these firms to see if it's what you want. But it also might be useful for you to have conversations with people within your own school who are professors or the head of honors colleges, or people who might know a lot of alumni, like the career services, just so you can even ask them like, hey, do you know any alumni from our schools who've gotten into these firms that I could get in touch with? Because I'm sure that they would be able to get you in touch with them a lot easier than you reaching out to them on LinkedIn. Hopefully from this, you feel a little bit better about approaching networking and being able to more easily think of it not as something that's super selfish, something that you're only doing to get your foot in the door, and that you can still be a genuine person who makes good, positive relationships doing networking. But of course, the real way to do it well is for you to be interested in the people that you're reaching out to and then have good conversations. And that kind of brings us to our second portion of the video, which is how to actually go about networking. When going more into how to actually go about networking, remember to keep in mind that these things apply even after you've gone through the consulting interview process for other things that you might be doing in life. Like I mentioned earlier, when I'm going to talk about how we go about networking, I'm going to break it up into the before, the during, and the after of the call or the Zoom. And the before is definitely going to be the longest. So let's get into it. There's no particular order for like the 6 or 7 different points I'm going to talk about in the before, but of course the timestamp for all of them will be down below if you want to see. The first thing that I'm going to talk about in terms of this before process is doing your research. So when I say doing your research, I mean doing your research on the companies that you're wanting to apply to and their process. So of course you want to make a list of companies that you're applying to, and then you want to make sure that you know a lot about the company from what they put on their website and then on their social media. How are they representing themselves? What is the feeling that you're getting from these firms? And hopefully from this, you will be able to start understanding, okay, I'd rather work for this one or that one, and that can prioritize how you reach out to people and who you want to reach out to. But the real reason to do this research, not only for yourself, is so that when you're having conversations with people, you don't ask stupid questions. It's so frustrating when I have a call with someone, and I've heard this from my colleagues as well, that when I have a call with someone because they're interested about learning more about my experience with consulting, then they ask me, how do I get into consulting? Or they ask me, what is management consulting? Which those are like valid questions to ask, but I think that those people could have asked the questions better if they had done more research, especially on the process one. There are a lot of videos and a lot of resources out there on how to get into consulting, right? And so a better way to ask that question once you've done research is, hey, Neel, I'm really interested in learning more about how I can approach the case interview process better. The ways that I've thought about doing it are this, this, and this, but I wanted to hear how you did it and if it differed from the things that I've heard. That's a more educated way of asking that question. The second thing after doing your research is making sure that you have a really good LinkedIn and a good resume. Especially if you're using LinkedIn to reach out to people, the first thing that someone is going to do once you've reached out to them is look at your LinkedIn and see, if have they put enough time into their LinkedIn for me to think that they are a serious candidate and someone who won't waste my time. And then I think the same thing goes with your resume. Oftentimes, especially if you're reaching out to people over email, what you can do is attach your resume and say, hey, blah, 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 I'm interested in talking to you. Here's some times. And then at the end of the email, you can say, and for your convenience, I've attached my resume so you can see a little bit about my background. And that's a really subtle way of being able to say like, hey, look at my resume, because I think by you looking at my resume, you will be able to see that I'm a serious candidate. And then also, of course, get to know a little bit about my background so we can have a better conversation once we actually talk. The next thing that I want to talk about is once you figure out the companies you want to reach out to and you find some people on LinkedIn that you think would be good people for you to reach out to, then do your research on those people. What are their backgrounds? What are some things that you think they're interested in? And potentially, what are some ways that you can tie their interests with your interest? For example, for when I was reaching out to people within the big three, I came from an engineering major. And so what I would do is look for people who worked at these companies who were also engineering majors so that I could ask them the simple question of, hey, I see you're an engineering major just like me. What was the process for you like, and how was the transition from going from engineering to something that you don't really use a lot of engineering in? I'm really curious to hear more about that. And that kind of showed them, I'm sure, that I did my research. And then also I was curious and genuinely interested in their experience because it was similar to mine. I was invested to learn more about them because it had a big impact on what I could potentially be doing in the future. The next thing that I would recommend that you do before you reach out or have conversations with people is try to figure out your self-intro. Whenever you talk to these people over Zoom or over the phone, they're probably going to say, hey, I'm really interested to get to know about you. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself? And so when they do that, you need to make sure that you have, and it doesn't have to be scripted, but at least have an idea of what you want to say, like you're from this place, you go to this school, this is my major, these are the experiences that have led me to wanting to be into consulting. And then just in general, these are the things that I like doing with my free time, or things that I really have fun doing, or here's a cool thing that I've done recently. Just to get them quickly up to speed on who you are so that y'all can have a more genuine and interesting conversation going forward. And I think those are the main things that I would say that I would recommend you all to do before you start actually reaching out to people. But now that we're at this point of, okay, now you need to reach out to people, how do you go about doing it? And the ways that I'm thinking about reaching out to people have been in hitting on three specific categories. The first one is personalization, the second one is being purposeful, and then the second one is being to the point. And I didn't really intend for all of them to, be P's, but whatever. And I think also these will help both when you're cold reaching out to people you don't know, but then also even when you're following with people you might have met in person, or when you're reaching out to friends of friends. Starting with personalization. So of course you want to keep your outreach personalized. It is really frustrating when again, this is something that I've heard from my friends and then also I've experienced myself, when I get an email or I get a LinkedIn from someone and it seems like this is just a copy and paste of something. Because then that shows me this person doesn't really want to talk to me. They're just trying to network kind of in the bad sense, and they don't really care about who I am. They just want to get some information from me and potentially get a foot in the door. Whereas if someone reached out to me and was like, hey, Neel, I saw that you did ultimate frisbee in college, or I saw that you were part of this club. That's also something I'm doing in my school. I'm really interested to hear about how that went, and then also talk to you about your consulting experience. That's a lot more personalized and would more likely want me to be like, yeah, no, I'd love to talk to you. I'm glad that you did your research. Thank you for doing that. That indicates to me that we're probably going to have a more informed conversation. So the second point is being purposeful. Now, of course, when you are reaching out via LinkedIn and trying to send a note on a connection, you don't have that many characters, so it's kind of hard to be purposeful in this. But the way I would say you should be purposeful is with some of the things that we've already mentioned, which is one, having specific questions that you think this person could help you answer. And then two, somehow their background is related to yours. And so that's your purpose, that you and them have similar backgrounds, and thus it makes sense for you to talk to them. And then the last point about actually reaching out to people is being to the point. I cannot tell you how many times I've gotten emails where someone is like, I know you're so busy, but then they give me paragraphs, either about themselves or about different things. And I don't read them, so I don't really know what they're saying, but you can't both acknowledge that I'm busy and that you want to be careful of my time and then send me a novel to read, right? So when I say being to the point, I just mean quick intro. Hey, I hope you're doing well. I saw that we have this in common. I was wondering if we could talk about this and also just to hear more about your consulting experience. Here are some times I'm free. When are you free? Thank you. Bye. Right? And an email like that is super quick, and it's easy for me to see, okay, this person's done their research. They've also been really kind and taking a lot of the effort out from me. It's a huge difference if someone comes to me saying, hey, these are the times I'm free, when works for you, rather than saying, hey, can we talk, when are you free? Because then that puts all of the effort on me to go check my calendar and be like, oh man, like here's when I'm free Monday, here's when I'm free Tuesday, etc. Whereas if someone sends me times, then I can just say, okay, this person's free this time, let's see when my calendar's open, boom, there we go, So doing these little things when you're reaching out and being to the point, it will really help the other person be able to just say yes to you rather than you causing them to do a lot of work. I think that kind of covers all of the things that I would recommend for y'all to do before you actually reach out to someone or while you're reaching out to someone. Now let's say that you've been successful and someone within the firms that you want to work at is like, hey, yeah, like I'd love to talk to you. Here, let's talk at this time. So now you already have a scheduled time where you want to talk to someone. How do you approach that conversation successfully so that both you have a good conversation and then you potentially can build a longer term relationship with this person? The first thing I will say is make sure you do not forget about that. Set an alarm, make sure you have a calendar alarm so that you do not forget about it. It's not a big deal if you forget about it, but that's just an easy thing that you can correct so that it doesn't ruin the relationship or isn't a bad mark against you. Right? Because you are asking someone for their time. So this is not even just with networking, but just in general. If you're asking someone for their time, you need to be respectful by making sure you're prompt and don't forget it. The next thing I will say is it could be a good thing for you to follow up an hour or two beforehand, especially if they mention that they're going to be super busy, just so you can be like, hey, are you still good to talk in an hour? I know you mentioned you were super busy. So if that's the case, no big deal. And here's another time next week or in a couple days from now that I'm free. Again, doing the thing where you're making it really easy for them to say, sorry, I am busy, but that time does work. Or sorry, I am busy, but actually, and that time doesn't work, but here's another time that works, right? You're really showing them that you're trying to, I guess, meet them in the middle by making it as easy for them to interact with you and eventually talk to you as possible. And then the other things I'll talk about in regards to how to approach actually having a conversation with someone are pretty basic. Of course, be appreciative. Don't be overly casual, but don't be too professional. Don't come off as a robot. And I know that's hard to say, but try to approach this like you're approaching someone who could potentially be a friend, right? So take a genuine interest in wanting to talk to them, get to know the hobbies that they're doing. Maybe even a good segue into talking about consulting is like, what are your hobbies and how have you been balancing them with, I know, the like a lot of hours that you're working, right? And then the last thing I'll say, which kind of ties into the research point that I made several times, is make sure that you have questions that you can answer this person so that if the conversation lulls or if there's you're not really thinking of any specific questions, then you always have questions that you can ask anyone and it doesn't sound like a dumb question, So one question that I think I always used to use was, do you think you made the right decision? If you could go back to graduating undergrad or even to when you went back to your freshman year to pick a major, how would you do it again? And do you think you'd still end up at the firm that you're at right now? Or are you happy that you made this decision? That's a question that I think is something that you can't find on the website because that's just a very personalized question. And also a question that you can ask to anyone, blending in any of the personalized stuff that you've heard about them. And then the last thing I'll say in terms of the actual call is something that you'll say at the end. So if you think you've had a really good conversation with this person, that you think that they have a positive impression of you, and you've also conveyed that you're serious about consulting, then I think you can be direct with an ask and say, hey, it was really good talking to you. I'd love if in a month or two from now, once I've run several cases, like 10, 15 cases, and I feel pretty good about it, could I reach back out to you so that we could case, even if it's for a simple market sizing? I'd love to just get your input so that I can get even better before the interviews. Does that sound okay? And I think being very direct with that ask is totally fine. And if they say no, no big deal, but it's not something that they would hold against you because they went through the same process. They know the importance of being good at casing and can at least appreciate the fact that you're trying to get better. So yeah, that kind of concludes all of the advice I would give in terms of how to actually handle the call. And then after you've had a call with someone, I think the clear next thing to do is just to send a thank you email or LinkedIn message saying, hey, it was really great talking to you. I appreciate the time. And then maybe you can throw in some personalization by saying, I really enjoyed hearing about your experiences X, Y, and Z, or it was really cool to hear how you were maintaining this interest while still working at whatever firm they're working at and working really hard. And then you can also follow up just acknowledging if they did agree to do something as a follow-up for you. For example, if they agreed to look at your resume, send them your resume and say, I appreciate you doing that. Or, if they agreed to case you in a couple months from now, you can put as a last comment in your email saying, I really appreciate you agreeing to case me in a month from now. I'll reach out then and we can figure out some time, and then just end the email there. So now for the last part of the video, which I think will be the most exciting, which is when I actually go over some messages and emails that I've gotten, and I talk y'all through, what I liked, what I didn't like, how I think they could be improved, just so that you can see a very literal example of what I'm talking about rather than just all of these theoretical things that I'm saying. So I'm looking at it on my laptop, but of course I'll post it somewhere on the screen as well so y'all can see. But going on with this first one, I think this first one is an email I got from someone who I didn't know, and I saw it and I was like, whoa, that's a lot of words. And so I started reading a little bit through it, and I realized that this is all about the person who was reaching out to me. There was nothing in here about me, and so my immediate thought was, like, this person just sent this to everyone he could find, right? Like, this is not personalized at all. And then he makes an ask at the end saying, can I have 15 minutes next Thursday at this time to ask 3 specific questions? And I'm like, if you want to ask 3 specific questions, man, you can just email me the question without sending me all this other additional reading, right? So I think the better way of going about it is this person was really I focused, I being themselves, whereas you should be more focused on the person you're reaching out to, right? So instead, he should be saying, maybe he gives me the explanation of I'm this kind of student at this university, but then saying I've seen your profile or I've seen your LinkedIn and I'm really interested to talk to you for these reasons, right? Because then that makes it seem like he actually cares to want to talk to me rather than making this seem like an email that he sent out a bunch of people with no level of personalization. And I guess another way to think about it is, if you ever got an email like this, would you want to respond? Compared to if someone was more personalized to you. So yeah, that's the first example. I think next example, we can contrast that with maybe a LinkedIn request that I got that I think was decent. It could have been better, but it wasn't bad. And so this is coming from someone, he goes to the same school that I went to. And so because of that, I was much more likely to say yes, because I think along with a lot of the people I know who work at these firms, they're pretty open to people who are from their own schools reaching out to them, whether it's on LinkedIn or email or whatever. And even if it's just sending a connection, like, I will almost always accept someone who comes from my own school. And so this person made it a little personalized, talked about my role at Bain, wasn't super personalized, did focus on himself a lot, talking about how he transitioned from some things and was really trying to break into banking. Maybe that's not the most important thing to say, like I know that a lot of people out there who are interested in consulting are also interested in banking, but it doesn't really matter to me. All I care about, are you interested in consulting and do you want to talk, right? And so maybe he could have spent less time talking about that he wanted to break into banking, but also is looking at consulting as well, because that just makes it seem like he doesn't really know what he wants to do, which it's totally fine if you don't. But in a short message like this, you just want to say, hey, I'm interested in consulting. I'm still figuring out if it's the right path for me, and I'd love to talk to you because you came from my school. So I think that's a better way of going about it. And then he probably could have saved enough words to be like, hey, does this time at this date work for you? Just so I could easily say, yes, let's talk at that time, or no, that time doesn't work, but here's another time. So I think this example is decent. And then next, I'll go to a LinkedIn connection request with a message attached that I thought was pretty good. Again, it's hard to become personalized in a LinkedIn message because you have so few characters when you're reaching out to someone for a connection. And so I thought this person did a decent job, just giving a quick introduction to himself and then saying that he wanted to talk to me. It wasn't super personalized, but again, it's hard to be really personalized in a LinkedIn connection message, and I think everyone knows that. And it helped that when I clicked on his profile, he had a really good LinkedIn. It was filled out, he had pictures, and it seemed like the things that he was doing were pretty cool and that he would be someone who would be a good candidate. So the strength of his LinkedIn, along with him just reaching out in a pretty positive manner, helped. And so those are some examples. And then lastly, I'll give you an example that I actually sent this message to someone else. This is not when I was going through the Big 3 consulting process. This was actually pretty recently. So I'm trying to do something called the Schwarzman Scholarship, hopefully in the next couple years. And so what I've been trying to do is talk to people who have done the scholarship just to hear their perspective, hear their background and their experiences doing the scholarship, so I can just see what exactly about it I'm really interested in. But in general, it's something I'm really interested in. And so I'm lucky because working at Bain, there are a lot of people who have either worked at Bain who are now doing the Schwarzman Scholarship, or who did the Schwarzman Scholarship and are now working at Bain. And so I came across someone's profile who was doing the Schwarzman Scholarship currently and had worked at Bain in the past. And so I sent him this message kind of showing that personalization, saying I saw your post about something that my friend liked. I also saw that you worked at Bain, so I'd love to talk to you about both your Bain experience and then I'll show you your Schwarzman experience. So this is an example of how I personally have used these kinds of principles within networking to talk to someone who has done something that I think is really cool and something I want to hopefully do in the future. So I think showing these examples helps y'all understand what I mean when I'm talking about the different kinds of things related to how to reach out and how to network well. And then here's some other just like things that I realized I didn't mention in the video, so I'm just going to mention them here. There are 3 points, I think. The first one is when you're having a conversation with someone, don't just interrogate them. I got this from one of my colleagues. He had just gotten off of the phone with someone who's just interested in consulting and was like, wow, like she just asked me like 100 questions, didn't tell me anything about herself. And then after answering all of her questions, she was like, okay, thanks, bye. And so like even if I had a really good conversation with her, which that doesn't sound like a great conversation, but if my friend even wanted to recommend her for an interview, he wouldn't have had anything to say about her because she didn't tell him anything. She just asked a bunch of questions. So whenever you're having conversations with people, try to make them actual conversations, like try to learn a little bit about them. Don't be afraid to share about yourself. Just make sure to be aware of how long you're talking and make sure that you're making a point, And the point doesn't have to be super sophisticated, but just if you're telling a story, make sure it's not taking up too much time. And that the person also knows enough about you to where if they wanted to recommend you, they had some tangible personal things about yourself to say. The next thing is don't go crazy when reaching out to people. This can actually hurt you. Even if you're having really good conversations, if you reach out to like 20, 30 consultants within the same office, people will talk and they'll be like, oh, this person reached out to me. And then other people will be like, whoa, like that person reached out to me too. And then if there's like so many people, then like, what are these, is this person just reaching out to everyone, And that kind of takes away from the purposeful point, which you do want to be purposeful when reaching out to these people. So reaching out to a whole bunch can actually hurt your chances. So I would avoid that. But of course, it's on you to figure out what is too many versus too little. I don't want to give you a number because there really isn't a number like that. And then the last thing is, let's say that you reach out to someone by email. Let's say that it's a medium where you can actually follow up with them because you can't really follow up with someone if you've sent them a LinkedIn connection request. So let's say it's email. Let's say you email someone to ask them for some time to talk with you. If they haven't responded within maybe like 4 or 5 days or by the next week, I think it's totally fine to send a follow-up. Just don't be too sassy about it. Don't say, hey, I saw that you didn't respond to my previous email, so I'm sending you another one. You could just keep it short and say like, hey, like person's name, I was just curious to see if you'd still be free for us to chat. Here's a time that I'm free this coming week, and update the times that you sent over that you're free so that they can easily be like, oh yeah, sorry, I saw it, but oftentimes what happens is they saw the email, but they were in a rush to do something or finish something by a deadline, so they couldn't respond to it, and then it just slipped their mind after. So by you sending that follow-up email, making it short, concise, and then giving them a time to which they can react to yes or no, you're really showing them that you want to be careful of their time and that you're serious about actually talking to them. It's not just some email that you blasted out to a bunch of people. So yeah, those are the kinds of extra things that I wanted to talk about. So that's the end of the video, y'all. I hope that through us covering the questions like what is networking, how do you go about doing it, and then me showing y'all real examples of people reaching out to me over email or over LinkedIn has really helped you figure out how you can go about doing it in a more effective and comfortable manner. And as usual, if there are any comments or questions that you have concerning the content of the video today or things that you'd like to see in the future, please comment them down below so that Rohit and I know what kinds of videos y'all want us to make in the future. And I guess we haven't asked for this yet, but of course, if you're enjoying the content that we're making and appreciate the fact that we're doing this kind of, on our own time for free, we'd really appreciate if y'all could like, subscribe, comment, show these videos to friends who are going through the consulting process as well. But yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. Hope y'all have a good day and see y'all next time.